Meeting to order. This is a 2016 budget workshop session. Jim has gathered together the predicted needs for 2016. We've made some predictions on income for 2016. So Jim, we'll just start out by going over that.
Yeah, I'll do that. What I'd like to do first, though, is go over a tentative schedule for this budget season. I propose to get a draft budget to the board on October 12th. That's because I'm away October 26th. So the board will have October 26th and November 9th for discussion. It would need to approve the budget for public review on the meeting on November 23rd. And I've tentatively scheduled December 14th for adoption of the budget. That will leave you an additional meeting in December on the 28th. So there would be some leeway. So that's at least what I'm proposing as of this time, unless you think otherwise.
What was that, the first December date, Jim?
First December, the only December date was December 14th, which would be to adopt the budget. That's the first meeting.
Then that leaves us one more meeting in December.
We've got the meeting on the 28th in December, but again, it's after Christmas, right before New Year's, so it's, you know, this schedule avoids that if it's possible. In terms of the 2016 budget, I've reviewed things with the heads of all of the departments, and I've reviewed revenues to date, historical revenues, and made projections of revenues. And I have the following assumptions for the 2016 budget. On the revenue side, I'm anticipating increased transfer taxes for the Eagle Farms and Roner developments. I am anticipating that they will have approximately 2 new houses per month each. They are estimating higher numbers than that, but to be conservative, I'm estimating that they will have 50 new houses between the new developments next year. We will also have Pulte closing on phase 2 next year. And my anticipation is that we will see an increase in transfer taxes of approximately $125,000 next year. I'm also anticipating increased real estate taxes. It is not from any increase in the real estate rate, but that is again because of adding new houses. And by adding the new houses, I anticipate that that will increase the real estate tax by about $30,000. With respect to the earned income tax, the median per household wages in the township are actually in excess of $150,000 per house. If I look at just 25 new houses for the whole year and 2% for wage increases, what I've done is conservatively estimate another $30,000 increase in the earned income tax. That yields total increased revenues of $185,000 in taxes. We do have a revenue this year in terms of there's a $100,000 impact fee, which is due December 16th. There is no such impact fee due next year, so that would mean a loss of that impact fee. So I'm looking at overall revenue increases of $85,000. Now, in terms of expenses, I'm looking at increased police wages per contract of 3.5%. I'm looking at increased wages for non-uniform workers. We do not have an agreement with the union at this time. I have been conservative in my estimate to the board because I'd like to err on the high side, because then there's less of an impact on the budget. In terms of medical plans, Divot has a historical average increase of 7.5% per year. The information I'm seeing right now is there's a fair amount of variation in both increases and decreases. The latest information I have actually talks about 4.5% overall increase, but again, wide variation in terms of what the actual payments are. For this purpose, for purposes right now, and hopefully we'll have better numbers later, I'm estimating 7.5%. We're looking at replacing one of the Crown Victoria police car with a new police car, not a pickup truck, but a new car. We're looking at replacing aged firearms and tasers. For administration, we're looking at replacing some of the old 4-drawer file cabinets. These file cabinets we originally obtained for free from a company that had closed its headquarters in southeastern Pennsylvania. They are now at a point where drawers don't open, and some of them represent a tipping hazard. So we started this year to replace several of them, and we're going to go into a program next year of replacing more of them. And they are where we keep primarily parcel files. And in the room where the parcel files are, there's approximately 20 of these type of file cabinets. One of the variable police expenses is educational and training. We expect that next year should be about the same as this year. I've talked with the chief. I believe he's actually going to start his PhD program. In terms of the pension plans, we already received from the vendor who does the police pension plan the percentage for our MMO for next year. We have in fact calculated the MMO for next year. It will be before the board shortly for approval. But the MMO for next year, which is the minimum municipal obligation, is slightly below this year's number. So it's based on that, and based upon what we assume the funding will be by the state, which we expect to be probably exactly what it was last year and what it will be this year, we're looking at a total of about $17,000 in township funds, which is the same as what we believe is going to be required in 2015. One of the items that was in this year's budget, which we did not do, is roof repairs for the barn that's to my left. What we're proposing to do is the architectural study to look at future use, future building needs, and we are going to hold off on those repairs until that study is completed and it's determined what the future for that barn is. The new budget looks at a new boiler for the Griffith Homestead, so the house can be leased out if in fact it is not a place which is going to be used pursuant to the architectural study. We also begin some soffit repairs. The main heat pump for the administration building is now 12 years old. We've been advised by the people who have our maintenance contract that it is approaching the end of its normal life. So we're looking to set aside money for replacing that unit. We're looking at as I said before, funding the architectural study for future space needs as part of the long-term planning. And so the last but not least, we're looking at buying a new service truck. Service truck is a truck that has great utility for us. We move a lot of equipment and materials in it to do work on all sorts of things. Our current truck was involved in an accident. It was hit by a driver and broadsided several years ago, which bent the frame. We are now in a situation where the compartments on that truck are in bad shape. They have holes in them. what we'd like to do is replace that truck, remove the body from the existing truck, and still keep that truck in the fleet as a snowplow, since it is actually a good snowplow and would also be a piece of equipment that can be used to move other equipment. So those are the assumptions that I have in terms of road projects. We're looking at repaving Horseshoe Trail from Davis Lane to St. Matthews Road. We've already done from Davis Lane to Bertrand Road and from Bartlett to Route 100. Looking at doing drainage along Kimberton Road. Kimberton Road is a difficult road because there's not a lot of fall, but there's a lot of water, and we've started work with the engineer to design what kind of drainage there could be along that road. And before any road repairs really should start on that road, we need to install additional drainage. People who travel that road will know that, there have been some difficulties with maintaining the pavement on that road. Doing the drainage is the first step in fixing that problem. We're also looking at potentially repaving portions of Flint Road. Again, Flint Road is another problem road. One of the main problems with Flint Road is in the middle of it, there's a, for lack of a better word, a swamp. We can put as many pipes as we want under the road, they're simply going to fill up with water, which is a considerable problem for trying to do a long-term fix to that road. So we're looking at repaving portions of the ends of that road and also trying to determine what we can do with the remainder of that road next year. We're also looking at potentially tar and chipping Redbone Road. Redbone Road is a road that is jointly owned with Upper Euclid Township. It is a gravel road. It is, for the most part, relatively flat and relatively straight. We think it would be a good candidate, like a portion of St. Matthews Road that we did about a month ago, for tar and chip. To the extent that tar and chip work that we did on St. Matthews Road makes it through the winter without significant problems, we're looking at extending that experiment to Redbone Road, which we think will allow us to deal with some of the issues on that road, which are not severe, but there's dust problems, there's erosion problems, and this would allow us to deal with those potential problems. The overall impact of all of these assumptions, at least as of right now, is that, and let me go to another point, and that is we expect that there are certain expenses that we incurred this year which will not be repeated in 2016. One is the purchase of a new truck to do a lot of things, including snow plowing in Eagle Farms, the purchase of the lawnmower to do park maintenance, and the police cameras. That's a budgetary savings of $131,500. And to the extent we do what is proposed to do in the budget, which among other things is to purchase the service truck over time, the impact so far, without going through every 300 plus line items in the budget, is that revenues will exceed expenses by about $98,000. In terms of other revenues, liquid fuels next year will be increased pursuant to the relatively recent state law, which put on us the largest gas tax in the nation. It will be increased by $24,200 for the year 2016. And in terms of open space tax receipts, we anticipate that the receipts will exceed the bond requirements by about $190,000. and that $190,000 will be kept in our account so that someday we can pay off the open space bond early. And the earliest time I believe we can pay that off is 2016. So in terms of where we are right now with the budget, with various things that I've been able to discuss with various people in the various departments, and with looking at trends with respect to income, with respect to building, this is where I think we're going to be roughly as of right now. Again, I propose to give the board, assuming that they find these budget assumptions acceptable, in large part, a draft budget, which will be a balanced budget, which as of right now, given the information I have, will not require any tax increases. But my anticipation is I will have that to the board in approximately 1 month's time at the first meeting in October. Does the board have any questions?
That's a good presentation, Jim. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you anticipated the revenue for this year, with all the pluses and minuses to expenses and revenue, to be $98,000 over expenses. And then you just said you expected a balanced budget.
Well, yeah.
So you're going to put that where?
So that will go either into it will be carried over,
In the carry forward number?
or it'll go into, we have a line in budget, which if I can find it for you, is essentially miscellaneous expenses. And yes, miscellaneous expenses 01493,000, miscellaneous expenses, and it's called miscellaneous expenses / reserve. And you would either see the money going into the carryover or into that account, or both.
Or it might be spent during the year as needed.
Well, yeah, I mean,
It's a reserve. Again.
yes, it's a reserve, but in terms of budget, you're gonna get a balanced budget.
Right.
So I'm gonna balance revenues and expenditures, and one of the ways you do that is through carry forwards and carryovers. So going into next year, I will calculate what I believe the carry forward is gonna be, and to the extent there is a number that, by which revenues exceed expenses, then it'll increase the carryover or increase the miscellaneous expenditures, or both.
Anything else, John?
I just want to hear what other people have to say.
David?
Well, something I think we should eventually do, not for this coming year, but I would really like to see us pursue 24-hour police coverage. It's my understanding that if we do that, we can't do it this year, if only because we don't have the room for additional bodies that would be necessary to provide that coverage. And we have to figure exactly how we're going to pay for it, because it involves probably another $200,000 in expenses. So we certainly don't want to rush into it, but it's something I think long-term that we want to seriously consider maybe for 2017.
I don't have a comment on that, but.
On anything?
Yeah. Jim, is it possible, without creating too much of a workload on you, I'm not looking to, but at the end of the budget, have a summary of a paragraph or two? Because when I look at the budget, I have difficulty taking out operating, or the open space and the carry forward number and the revenue and expenses from the sewer and water treatment plants. And just some summary of income net, true operating expenses versus true operating income, and a sense of, let's call it unrestricted surplus that the township might have at that time if everything goes well.
That's doable.
I too, John, find the format of the budget, which is state mandated, extremely frustrating, hard to read. at one point, we discussed doing, I think Maria suggested an executive summary of the budget. And our solicitor said, you have to be very careful about that because the budget's what it is, and once you start to characterize it, you might have a problem. But I do agree that we need a simpler form. I have to make sure the solicitor okays.
Yeah, and one of the things I can do for you is, for example, on the carryover, I can certainly indicate, give you what the carryover
That's the biggest thing.
is made of. You know, that's relatively easy.
Great, thank you.
I would like to see us go to the accrual form of tracking our income and expenses for budgetary purposes. I know that Barbara Thornton doesn't recommend it, what they do say in their summary, that it's something we would consider, that it's a much more detailed way to track and more actual reflection of what's going on in the township budget. I know, Jim, there's some reasons why we don't do that, but as we get bigger and more complicated and more line items, I think that's something we ought to think about.
It's certainly something to think about, and Barbara King has talked about sort of a modified accrual, which is to do accrual for certain things, but not for everything. I think the main problem that you run into is shifting, do a dramatic shift from cash basis to accrual in 1 year makes it really difficult to do comparisons from 1 year to the next. And it's a major shift in terms of how things are done. It's certainly something to consider. I'm not sure, given workloads and knowledge bases, that we wouldn't have to at least hire a consultant to assist us in that, because my strong suspicion is that the shift from cash to accrual is probably going to be outside my expertise.
Does Tom Hosea, the guy we hired to help guide us through the process, he have experience and ability to?
I would hope so, but again, most municipalities are on a cash basis, so I don't know. That's something I would have to ask them. But since most municipalities are on a cash basis, I do know that the auditors are most familiar with cash basis. So, but everybody who has a CPA certainly knows accrual. I mean, that's what, other than individuals and municipalities, that's what most corporations are on, it's accrual basis.
Okay. Anything else, John, David?
No.
I think it's a lot to digest, but we've been given the revenue assumptions before, so it looks good.
Okay, so we'll take questions from the floor, and Sarah has her hand up first.
First, I want to thank you very much for holding this meeting and for Jim's clear description of what he was thinking and what the elements mean. I appreciate that very much. My comment really goes back to John's question about what to do with the 98,000, and does it ultimately come down to you three guys? Where do you want to see it? Do you want to see it in the carryover, or do you want to see it on the reserve line? I mean, Jim can put it in whichever when he's drafting the budget, but ultimately, I think you guys say where you want it to be found. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think that's accurate. The other thing too is there may be something upon further consideration that the board sees as an unmet need, and the board may direct me to
So that's just something.
apply that money towards that need.
That's just part of what could happen during the review process
Absolutely.
between October and December.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Maria?
I'm sorry, but I think I missed on when you went through the increases. You said the police were at 3.5, and you said we don't have a non-uniform workers contract. We're without a contract with that. Did you give us an increase that you were
I
expecting?
did not. I gave it to the board. I'm hesitant to make anything public because we're in negotiations.
Okay, fair enough.
But the assumption I gave to the board for budgetary purposes is conservative, because I think that's something we should be conservative on.
Okay, another question I have is, you also said that 2016 was the earliest that the bond could start to be repaid back, and next year is 2016? So are we planning on doing any paying bond off early at that point? Is that in the budget numbers? And what date would that be?
It is not in the budget numbers, and I'm not sure it would be in the budget numbers. I believe it's after July of 2016 would be the first time that we could make payments without penalty on the bonds. But again, I don't know that that would have much of an impact on the budget other than on the carry forward.
Balance sheet.
Yeah, there wouldn't be a lot of impact other than you'd see one expenditure for prepayment of the bonds, and you would see a decrease in the carryover to the following year.
And another question, can you said, can we switch to an accrual basis? Can you tell us why you think that's important? Because it would be very difficult to compare previous year's history if we do a switch from, cash basis to accrual. And as Jim indicated, most townships are on a cash basis. Why do you think it's important to do accrual?
I think you get a much more detailed breakdown of when the money comes in and where it goes and when it goes out. And I know that businesses, like Jim said, most businesses of any size are accrual, and our budget numbers are approaching to be a big number. And I would say that even though we don't have much experience with accrual accounting, some larger townships do, and they seem well satisfied with it. They're the reasons why I thought we would take a look at it. They're the reasons why I thought we would take a look at it.
And it would achieve some things. I think it would assist in future planning, because you would then set reserves, which is part of the accrual process. You would also then, for capital purchases, you could set aside money every year towards future purchases.
Can't you do that with the cash
It
basis?
is difficult, if you sort of have to put it in an account, and there are problems with doing that. So,
I don't
accrual helps a
understand.
lot with planning. It also helps a lot in dealing with there not being surprises. For example, if you have outstanding litigation, and right now we don't have, I think, hardly any outstanding litigation, but if you have outstanding litigation, one of the things you will do is you'll set up an accrual for it. So if you set up an accrual or reserve for that litigation, you then know that something is likely going to happen at some point in time, and that you will either pay money, and that's how it will work. In a cash basis, it's very difficult to do that. So consequently, there's more of what I'll call surprises in cash basis than an accrual. And that's just the nature of the beast. And I'm not a great fan of cash basis. I grew up on accrual, but we do cash basis. And I learned cash basis when I came here. I learned the budgeting process when I came here. The budgeting process is mandated by the state. They have a booklet which tells us how to set up all the various accounts and how to work things. And that's what we do. I just think accrual has some advantages, but I think the change from cash basis to accrual, I think, would be difficult.
I think it would be difficult too, but I also, I grew up on cash basis and also had tons of reserves, and we had those set up.
Anything else, Marie?
No, they were all my questions, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Francis?
How do you budget for snow removal, since we really can't anticipate the weather?
We have, I think, in this year's budget for snow removal, under winter maintenance, $80,000 budgeted. That is materials, state-funded materials, which means we use liquid fuel money to buy them, and contractor services. We budget for winter based upon our experience in prior years. One of the things we don't do is we've never decreased that amount, because we've seen what's happened in other municipalities where they have had light years and where they have decreased that amount. We have gradually increased that amount a little bit every now and then over the years, because we, again, like to be conservative. And if we have more money in winter maintenance and don't use it, then we have a good situation. It is, we've seen municipalities, and there's a certain small city to the south of us who had great problems several years ago when we had a really bad and snowy January. And they ran out, and they had had good years for a couple of years, so they basically took away their winter maintenance budget and used it elsewhere, and ran out of their winter maintenance budget by the end of January. That's a real problem. We would, one of the things we do, one of the things that I do in working with the treasurer, is we look at prior year's expenditures and look at where we are, and look at, and we try and be conservative on some of these expenditures. And winter maintenance, you know, we try and be conservative, and if it's a good winter, it's a good thing. We have extra money left in the budget.
Okay, Francis?
Thank you.
Okay. Is that you, Brian? Brian Curry?
Yeah. Jim, you said that it's difficult to set up reserves when you're on a cash basis. Can you explain why that's difficult?
It is difficult. It's something that I've discussed with the auditors. And I'd just rather leave it at that. It's just a difficult process.
You're saying that it's so difficult that you can't explain it to people?
I don't think it would be helpful to explain the process, because it gets into a lot of different things. It's something that I haven't been doing. I haven't been doing it with the blessing of our auditors, and it's something that I'd rather, if we get into doing it in the accrual method, I will have to do it. And it will obviously be part of the complication of switching.
Can we keep the cash reserve in the general fund reserve? General fund account? I mean, that's what we do now. That's what it is.
I mean,
There's, you know, I mean, Maria
Well,
said
we have
they had
reserves.
accounts, I guess we have an account, if you say that's in the general fund.
right, well, and we have a separate reserve account too.
In other words, we have reserves.
We
But they're
do.
not titled reserves or assigned to any.
That's correct, they're
thing.
not,
Right.
I think it's
Right,
more
but
accurate
with
to
the-
say
with the-
they're not assigned to particular
Right,
matters.
but with accrual, they would be, or not
That's-
they would be, but the need would be made to be addressed.
That's correct.
Right, is that the right way to put that?
That's the correct way to put it.
Okay, Maria.
Yeah, if they're in the general account, then they're not reserves, because that general account could be used for anything. When it's in a reserve account, it is specific to what the need would be, so that it is set aside, because say if you have it in the general account, something comes up, you wipe out that account for whatever the reason is, now you no longer have reserves. So it's not really in the reserve, it's not really a reserve, it's in the general account. And
That's-
I don't think an accountant would agree with that.
But that's how municipalities do it. And the state's fine with that.
Brian.
I'm still lost a little bit here, because Jim, you've said it's difficult and you're wincing as you're saying that. Almost like it's painful to even conceive of it. Yet, you tell me you can't explain it. How do you have such a visceral reaction to the issue of making reserve accounts without being able to go and say why?
Well, my visceral response is more a visceral response to the budgetary process, which is a long, complicated, and difficult process. And you're looking at the person who does the budget. And I do that in addition to everything else I do. So I am not looking to make my life more difficult by switching to accrual if I can avoid it. On the other hand, if the board directs me to do that, I'd be happy to work with the board and with whatever consultant they choose to implement their desire to go to an accrual method. Happy to do that.
But that isn't my question.
Well, I think
My
it is,
question
it's
is
part of
just
my,
directed
but
towards
it's
his
my
work.
response, but it's my response to your question, I think.
Okay, okay, you done, Brian?
Well, it's a non-answer, but
Okay, Sarah, I think you're next.
And I think, again, the question about whether the reserve is in a special account or in a special line item, you three guys are the ones who will make a decision about whether you're going to spend it, because it's not going to be in the line item, the line that you may need to add it to, and you'll be knowing that you'll be taking out of the reserve or the carry forward or whatever. So I think that's the discretion we elect you for. I don't think we should micromanage the budget. We should be a part of hearing and understanding what goes into the budget, and we're here for the meetings when you talk about your expenses and you approve the costs, so we have an opportunity as citizenry to participate in that. But at some point in time, we elect you to take care of that for us. I just need to say that. Thank you.
Well, and I think Sarah raises an important point, which is that all of the expenditures, with the exception of payroll, are approved by the Board of Supervisors as through the bill list process.
And the payroll's essentially approved at the beginning of the year when you set the rates and
That's correct, and it's.
holiday schedule and whatever else.
You know, the issue there is we have to comply with state wages and our law. So it's not as if I can not pay people and wait till the board approves the payroll.
So, if we create a reserve to buy a police car, we put, accrual looks ahead 1 year at a time, is that right? So we put $40,000 in an account to buy a police car, and it's a reserve for the police car. And that winter, at the first half of the year that we have $40,000 in the budget, that winter is a terrible winter. And we go $50,000 over budget on snow removal, salt, labor, hire, overtime, contractors, all that stuff, which happens. I mean, it's happened to us, I know, and every other municipality. We couldn't take that money out of that police car reserve, is that right?
Not under current, no.
So for us to be able to do that, we'd have to have a much higher cash income that's unspoken for.
Correct.
Is that right?
Your cash would have to be much. Yeah,
Because
just-
what would their contingency be, where would we get
Right.
the money? If the Township bridge was condemned and it was, something we wanted to get fixed in a year rather than in 5 years, and we had the money, but it was in different reserve accounts, we couldn't move
Right.
that away. We couldn't say, well, we had a bad year or the bridge went down, so we're not gonna buy that, we're just gonna
Right.
buckle down and squeeze it out, we're gonna take that money and put it toward this emergency.
Right.
You can't do
You have
that.
no flexibility, right?
That's
Less
correct,
flexibility.
and if you look at what large municipalities do, they do that. But again, that creates a problem if you put money into separate accounts. Those accounts become dedicated accounts, which then can't be used for general fund purposes. That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so we'd have to rethink the way we, have to rethink a lot of stuff to go to accrual.
That's correct.
But it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing,
No,
because it'll take a lot more planning and foresight than what we do now, which is a year at a time. Is that
Right.
right?
right.
Am I saying that right, John?
I'm in the middle of a thought writing something down, but I
Okay.
think so.
Okay, Maria, you've said you're a
Well,
cash basis person,
I think that
so.
what you're saying is correct, but if I was the business owner and this was my budget and I had a bad year, and I dealt with properties and snow removal and all the exact same things that a township does on a different level. You know what that meant? It meant that I needed to tighten my belt other places. It meant that, because I didn't have unlimited amount of money, I had, rents coming in, that's what I had to pay it, otherwise I was doing cash calls to owners. So you do tighten your budget, your belt. You say, you know what, I had a bad winter with overtime, so you know what, we're not gonna do overtime this year. in other things, unless it's an emergency. We're gonna look at every dollar you spend. And I don't think that, in today's economy, that is what businesses have to do across the board. They have to look at every single dollar you spend. And I don't think that's a bad practice for anyone to get into.
Okay, what if the overages and unexpected expenditures far exceeded anything like overtime or hired contractor stuff? What would you do then? Where would you pull the money in?
Well, I don't know. Would you, today, would our carry forward cover that? I don't know whether it would. Would you be floating a bond for that? I don't know.
And then my other question is this even a subject for tonight's meeting? And maybe I shouldn't have brought it up tonight.
That's a possibility.
But the other thing is, unless we bring it up and talk about it and think about it, and then even if we ultimately decide to discard it and not go with it, at least we examined it and decided that it's not for us, and that's a good thing, because we're gonna learn something just in that process, isn't that right?
Talking about it.
What's that?
I said there's no harm in talking
Right.
about it.
Right. So I guess we would put the accrual idea to bed for right now. How's that? Does that suit everybody? Brian's first.
I think it's a good idea to discuss it, because, I don't know a lot about it. It almost sounds like you guys don't necessarily know a lot about it either. But now, okay, this is an item that may come up. Okay, I can go back and I can look at it, or I can talk to people and find out something more about it. So bringing up potential for it, as opposed to bringing out as a surprise, we're going to change over from cash to accrual next year. I think it's a good idea.
There's one, not to belabor this discussion, but years ago, I managed a couple apartment communities that were accrual basis. And if I'm not mistaken, Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, about September, October, I'd get a phone call from my regional manager saying, your property's doing well, but the other 14 in the portfolio aren't. So you can't carpet any more units anymore. I'd whine and I'd get one or two out of it. But then October came along and I got another memo that said, how much are you going to spend for the rest of the year on lawn repair? How much are you going to spend on every line item in your budget? And Jim's going to have to come up with some kind of numbers, and that's where the accrual comes in, because it's got to be year-end basis. So he's going to have to, I forget, I don't mean to say make up numbers or come up with numbers for that.
Come up with the numbers, that's correct.
And that's where the difficulty, at least for me, always came, was how do you know that?
Well, and the problem you also run into is that while there's a request to do that towards the end of the year, you're smack also in the middle of the budget process.
Exactly, just what you need.
So, one of the reasons I wince at some of these things is you're doubling the workload at the worst possible time.
Guess we need a reserve for extra help for that.
Well, the answer, and I hate to say this, but what you're potentially talking about.
You already said that.
Is you hire somebody to do budget, and you hire a financial analyst.
So if that person gets fired, can we use that for overtime?
There you go.
Well, see,
But you can't, right? You can't.
Well,
I mean, that's hypothetical. You can't. do that.
it's hypothetical, and the other thing, I'm very familiar with. I worked in a large corporation where used not only the accrual basis, but also took the thing that it's a bad thing to not spend your budget, and it's a bad thing to exceed your budget. So you had some rather bizarre things happening. Is that if you had money you had in your budget that you hadn't spent by the end of the year, all of a sudden you had all these strange and bizarre expenditures in December. Because if you didn't spend money in your budget, you didn't get the money in the following year's budget. We've never done that because the last thing we want to do is penalize the department for example, one of the things that happened this year is we had, a difficult winter, and when do you have overtime for snow removal? It's nights and weekends. And that's sort of the nature of the beast, and it's also the most appropriate time to plow and salt the roads because there's the least amount of traffic on it. So one of the things that happens is, what do you do if you have a lot of expenditures in January and February, and you have bad snowstorms in March? Do you stop?
Well, no, you can't do that.
You can't do that. That's the one thing about municipalities, is we can't stop providing services. We can't stop plowing the snow. We can't stop providing police services. We are not like certain corporations who can decide, well, we're simply not gonna do things.
Dave?
We're different.
You talked about floating a bond or something, but you're also talking, you may run into overtime. Do you have a line of credit?
No, we used to. We don't anymore. The reason we don't is because in order to have, we're allowed to have what's called a tax anticipation note.
Well, the reason we don't, to me, is we have $1 million budget surplus.
Yes, and that's the problem. And what
That's not a problem, it's a good thing.
No, it's a good thing, but the problem for me is I can't apply to the state. I have to get approval from the state to have tax anticipation note. I have to show them that I'm gonna have a cumulative deficit in a month of revenues over expenditures. And it's gotta be at a certain level in order to get that. I don't have that. Since I don't have that, we used to have these tax anticipation notes. We would, for the most part, not borrow against them, but they were there as basically an insurance policy. So if a bridge went bad, or there was something that happened, we could then use this line of credit to do what needed to be done, and then we'd pay it back. It's also a timing issue, so if you have like a fire and you need to do something, you do it, and then your insurance proceeds paid back the tax anticipation note later in the year. Because the other thing about tax anticipation notes is that you get them in January, but they have to be zeroed out by the year end. And that's state law. So municipalities, and I will tell you that when Mr. Brown was here and he was the treasurer, he and I worked long and hard with both the state and with banks to see if we could just get a line of credit from a bank. And the answer is, in Pennsylvania, the answer is no. That's a problem.
Okay.
Okay, Dave?
But that's what the answer in Pennsylvania, and that's one of the reasons why municipalities will carry a substantial amount in surplus, is because that's what they need to fall back on in case there's a problem.
Okay. Maria, have your hand up?
Yeah, I'd just like to be clear. During a snow issue or emergency, you have to provide services. That's a no-brainer. When I say that you need to manage, that you can manage overtime, not that you need to, but you can manage overtime. If overtime for snow removal, you're right, it usually happens at night, it's on weekends, but it's still a 40-hour week. The employee doesn't have to come in the next 8 hours during the day, where now they're working 12 or 13, 15 hours a day, that a lot of it is on overtime. They need to rest too. So you manage it by allowing them time off during the day, so that they're still working 8 hours, not necessarily overtime. You're minimizing overtime. It's been tested by unions, they're okay with it. It's been tested in courts, it's been tested in Pennsylvania. So, you know, that's what I mean. No, you can't stop services. I never intended that that's what my comment was about. My comment is about managing your staff so that you are getting the most out of them when the need arises.
And we do, and we manage them, but I will tell you, there are times, particularly when you have large snowstorms, that the amount of time that they work in a given day is pretty frightening.
But it's a 40-hour week. I mean, so yeah, it could
That's
be
true.
like 3 days straight,
But-
and then you're like, you know what, you got tomorrow off.
But
Employees
again,
don't necessarily like it. You know, they
we
don't
work
like it.
we work with our staff to try and deal with it, but, you know, the end result is that, you know, folks need to be able to get where they're going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, other questions or comments? John or Dave, do you have anything?
No.
Then do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have one quick.
Oh, I'm sorry, George. I
The
didn't see you.
numbers that you went through, can you post something on the website?
I'm hesitant to do so, and that's really up to the board. And the reason I say I'm hesitant to do so is because some of the numbers that I give in the board, they relate to union negotiations, so I'm hesitant to release that. Budget materials believe it or not, under the right to know law, are exempt from disclosure to the public. The budget itself is not, but materials that relate to determining what the budget is are exempt from disclosure. If the board would like me to identify what, and put something on, like the website, which would summarize what I think the expenditures next year at least look like at this time in terms of major expenditures, that's up to the board, but if the board wants me to do that, I could prepare something for the board.
So at the end of the month, you'll have the whole budget proposed for next year, is that?
As of October 12th, you'll see a draft budget. That will be the complete, it's 14 pages, single-spaced. I don't know how many lines it is, but I know it's well over 300 lines.
Right, we did it last year.
Yeah, and it's my intention to have a completed draft budget to the board for their meeting on October 12th. And that would give the board a month and 10 days to review it, and the public a month and 10 days to review it before they would have to approve it for public review. One of the problems you get to is once you approve it for public review, you really can't make any changes to it, because if you do, then you have to start that process all over again, which means that you'll miss your deadline of having a budget by the end of the year.
Well, what's the point of review if you can't change it?
It's state law. Does it make sense? What's one of the reasons I'm trying to get the board a budget by October 12th? So there is plenty of time for them, the public, to review the budget.
We would have had about 6 weeks to do it before it gets published. It's the putting in of.
It's just that once it gets published on November 23rd, there's what the board can change in it becomes very limited.
What you mean,
And
publish
that's-
means like advertise in a newspaper? Or
You
post it on the
advertise it in the
website?
newspaper, and we make it available at the front desk.
So you
We're
could-
required to have it available for public inspection for 20 days before it's adopted. And that's state law. And state law also says that if you make substantial changes to the budget, you need to re-advertise and go through the process again. But you also need to have your budget by the end of the year.
So basically, once it's unveiled, the clock's ticking, and that's...
That's correct. It becomes a problem. Yes. And that's state law. And
Okay, I think Brian's hand was up first, I'm not sure.
This goes back to what George said. Jim, it sounds like, I'm going to say you verbally redacted certain parts of what you talked about tonight. I don't have any problems with that. I think, what George is saying is the parts that are not verbally redacted, or, put something out there and you go and black out certain sections, or say, we're not telling you this, but the other parts of it, go and throw them up here, I think is what George is talking about. Is that
Well, you
correct?
read a lot of stuff here, I mean, basically.
Yeah, and again, it's up to the board, but I've offered to put something together which can go on the website. And if the board's okay with that, what I'll do is prepare something, pass it by the board, and if it's acceptable with them, we'll put it up on the website.
That's great, because this is a lot of good information. Really.
Yeah, there's a lot of information, and there's some information that, we're in the middle of union negotiations,
And I agree,
and I
you
don't
wouldn't-
want, I don't want some of this information public.
It sounds like in general you wanted to avoid publishing payroll-related items. Is that correct?
It's part of it, yes, but it's only part of it.
Okay.
I agree.
Can I just fact check my numbers that I reported, if you don't mind?
Sure.
For your income, you said the overall impact of you started at the overall impact of assumptions, but then you kind of went off course. So can you tell me what the overall impact on income is, and then what the overall impact is on expenses to come up with the 90,000?
If you're talking overall, the overall impact on revenues is additional $85,000, and the overall impact on expenses is actually a reduction, and I'll have to do that number for you.
You said 131, I think you
That's-
said that was
that's-
from capital expenditures. And
Those are capital expenditures which aren't repeated, but there's additional things that you have to add in to that. So why don't
Okay.
I can get that, hold on. See if I have it. I did have that, unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me.
Okay.
I can send it to you.
That would be great,
Or,
thank you.
or just, if you could decide to publish it, just put it there for everybody to have.
Okay, more questions?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded.
There's one more question.
Okay, Jane.
Sorry,
Jane.
I just wanted to bring up, and since you're done with the budget stuff, I wanted to know where we stand with the Black Horse Road thing. Since our
Dave and
site
I
meeting.
both are ready to go. John, what do you think?
I think I'm coming real close to being on board with it, but this is not the meeting to decide that.
Okay? Okay? Okay, all those in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.